we're filming,
right.
and I just want to thank you again for being willing to be interviewed. But where I was starting is that, Governor, you have been a part of my life and many in Hawaii, and we've seen your leadership in so many challenging circumstances for all the people of Hawaii. You've also connected us to the Pacific because you are a son of the Pacific.
Thank you, yeah.
And I think it's so meaningful to have you as part of this relaunching of the Pacific Islands Report, to hear your views of what the Pacific Islands means to you and as it relates to Hawaii, and maybe just sharing a little bit about your story in that context.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind remarks, and flattery will get you anywhere. So go ahead, let's go for it. Yeah, I think Pacific Islands are obviously very important to Hawaii because we are a part of it. More than that, though, is that we are a bridge for many of our Pacific Island neighbors in so many ways, not just geographically. I mean, also economically, educationally. Not only do we provide a bridge in a sense to obviously to the continental United States, but also to Asia. For many of the Pacific Islands, they needed an introduction, or if they needed an ally in dealing with countries that we had regular dealings with, first of all, because of our location, and also as a part of the United States. We were there for them. We are there for them. That's the kind of relationship that we have and we should have.
Thanks, Governor, for that. How about if I could just back up a little bit about your own personal story, and the first time maybe in the official capacity you see the role of Hawaii in the Pacific, but maybe as you grew up seeing yourself as a Native Hawaiian, first Native Hawaiian governor of any state in the United States, this is your ancestral homeland.
Right.
And through that process, where did you become awakened to the idea that you are part of the Pacific and this is in your journey? I wondered if you could back up a little bit where you grew up and then how you came to that realization.
I obviously grew up in a Hawaiian home, and so much of what we call culture now and was something that in a way I took for granted. Because it was all around me, right? But growing up in Hawaii, and appreciating not only Hawaiian culture, but everybody else's, but it wasn't. And one of the most fortunate moments for me was, in a way, I had a chance to go to the continent. I had a chance to go to Michigan to go to school, and so I not only did that expose me to the rest of America in a way, but it also made me appreciate Hawaii, and I can well remember all the kids that were with me from Hawaii, running out and enjoying snow for the first time, and that kind of experience, and then hating it for the rest of the winter. It's that. But what it also did was that it made me appreciate home. So when I came home, I was very fortunate to be part of Hawaii during its Renaissance, and during the 70s and the beginnings of getting to know what Hawaii was and appreciating my culture, because my generation was the generation in Hawaii where that were not taught our language, for example. We were I grew up with parents who were trained or believed that maybe they should not teach us some of that. And then getting back into reappreciating it and relearning it was very exciting. And then when I became, when I entered politics and became part of Hawaii's political structure, it was the same time that the Pacific Islands, many of the Pacific Islands, particularly those that were associated with the United States, were going through their rediscovery, their identity, their quest for independence, frankly. And one of the most interesting things for me was actually not only dealing with relearning Hawaiian culture, but discovering that many of our Pacific cousins were regaining their identity and their political status. And so that was happening right across the whole Pacific. And so when I became governor of Hawaii, it was the first time that all the areas in the Pacific, in the Polynesian Triangle, for example, was under Polynesian leadership. Because you had a governor of Hawaii that was Polynesian, you had Tahiti going through their own thing with the French, and they were under, expressing their self-governance. New Zealand had, for the first time, a Maori consul general, or governor general, and the same thing was going through with Samoa and the rest of the country. And then on the North Pacific, Micronesia was in negotiations. So with the United States for their relationships. This was a very, very exciting time, because what we discovered was that we all needed each other, sort of, and the program, the Forum of Pacific Leaders were founded because we could be of assistance to the people. For example, with Micronesia and the Marshall Islands and even Saipan and Palau, the people there had different points of views that might not be really understood by people from Washington, D.C. So who could carry the message? Obviously, as the governor of Hawaii and at the East-West Center, we had a opportunity to sort of be intermediaries, not only directly to the State Department and the U.S. and the executive branch, but also through our congressional delegation. So congressional delegation and ourselves, but being at the East-West Center, being governor of Hawaii, meant that we were also messengers to our own delegation. So this was all kind of happening, and then knowing the George Washingtons of these emerging countries was tremendously exciting. I was the youngest person in that generation of leaders, and to be able to associate with these giants, like for example Ratumara from Fiji, who was one of the founders of the East-West Center, and to be part of carrying out their vision, the vision that Governor Ariyoshi, Governor Burns, the President of the United States, Johnson, even Eisenhower, had when they laid the foundation for this institution, and meeting with these Ratumara, meeting with Jeffrey Henry from the Cook Islands, meeting with all of these people as they evolved was tremendously exciting, and we could deal with issues. I mean, in some respects, and that's why we formed the organization built on economies and not necessarily countries. The Pacific Island leaders, and we could deal with things like aviation. You can't be an island, and if you wanted to be connected, you had to have the means to do it. And so we could create something like a Pacific aviation policy, what we all were looking for. Or we can do law enforcement. Probably one of the most interesting things was that, the drugs were entering the United States not only through the southern borders, but also through Canada and across the Pacific. And so they were going to, and a lot of these countries didn't know how to really deal with this. And to be able to express to American authorities that if you wanted to really be effective in these policies, you need to send people to Palau, to help them deal with it and so forth. And I remember, for example, one of my most interesting moments was dealing with a request from the president of Palau to see what the reaction would be from the State Department if Palau decided to recognize Taiwan instead of the People's Republic of China. And where else or who else could they go to except us? And the reason why they were doing that was a lot of them, these emerging leaders in the Pacific, were educated here at the University of Hawaii. And they were educated at the University of Hawaii because there was an East-West Center. So this is a tremendous heritage that we have gotten the mandate to, I believe, carry on.
Thanks, Governor, for setting that groundwork of this renaissance that you felt and you saw it happening in the Pacific from the 60s, 70s, which led the way to the 1980s of Ratu Serkami Sesemara and Governor Ariyoshi in 1980 establishing the Pacific Islands Development Program and the economies, as you mentioned, of the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders.
Absolutely.
And you knew Ratu Serkami Sesemara?
Yeah, I knew him. I knew him because, first of all, he was part of the East-West Center. And I was fortunate enough to be lieutenant governor when Governor Ariyoshi was active. And he was still, we got to be quite good friends. He was a, how shall I say it? He was a very committed golfer, for example, and Hawaii was a great place to golf. And so, and a very good golfer, by the way. In fact, I should tell the people that he did a hole-in-one on the par 3 par 3 at the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel. And that was the most important moment in Hawaii, kind of place. And so, yeah, but more important, I mean, to the point where I was privileged, and I was asked actually by President Clinton to deliver the eulogy at Rotamara's funeral, on behalf of the United States. And so it was a good relationship. And he, the King of Tonga, I think that would be the King of Tonga at that time, who was a part of all of this effort, was the present king's grandfather. So it kind of dates me, but he was a genius. I mean, people think of, this wasn't just some bunch of natives running around. The King of Tonga actually wrote a mathematics textbook that was based on the abacus and reinvented he was teaching new math in Tonga really before the educational system in Hawaii caught up to new math. And so these guys were more than you might see it. And the same thing, to be Gaston Floss, who was the president of French Polynesia, for example, he was dealing with the French and their nuclear testing about the same time that the Marshall Islands, who was headed by President Amata at that time, and he was the George Washington of the Marshall Islands. He was dealing with that issue. And where would they go to have forums? Where would they go where they could all communicate? Well, before going to the up to Washington, they would stop off here. Why? Because they were all connected to the East-West Center, and we would meet, and as you pointed out, Ratimara and Governor Ariyoshi and these leaders all formed our program here. And what is interesting about that was that not only did they come together as economies across the Pacific, but they stand in one position that was permanent. Was the governor of Hawaii was the permanent vice chairman of the Pacific Island Leaders Organization. I don't know where that all went today, but that's how much they thought how important Hawaii was to their futures. And it was a very important time, and this was the role that we played. And as I said, oftentimes what it allowed, not only because Hawaii was economically and in a sense educationally their elder brother, although I was the youngest in the group, institutionally, but because it was understood that we understood them, so that we could tell people in the U.S. and in our own congressional delegation what their aspirations were and why they did what they did, and how they felt the way they did. And those were exciting times, and there were exciting leaders. Right across, Hawaii was very privileged to have educated at the University of Hawaii and through the East-West Center many of the people who would be considered the George Washingtons of their country. And I think that's a tremendous record.
Thank you, Governor, for that background. And another question I was asked, and of course we don't have to film this part and not carefully. We have the Pacific Islands Forum that Ratu Serkami Sesemara started. Then later on, over time, because of all the things you said, Pacific Island Conference of Leaders. Now, within the U.S. Pacific Strategy, it says Pacific Island Forum, the strategy, so that's becoming the central regional body. The Pacific Islands Development Program today is helping in the Pacific Island Forum as a Council of Regional Organization, the Pacific member. So in that, I think trying to work through how you see today Pacific Island Forum being that it's being this regional body, and the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders, a role that maybe it could, play in the changing dynamics of these two regional bodies that sit in the Pacific now.
I think that's our challenge. Now, the Pacific Island Forum, it consists of the sovereign countries, of the independent countries. And the Pacific Island Leaders, as I said, was built on the economies. I should say that the bureaucrats, the people especially in the State Department, really, at least initially, until they got to see the value of it, weren't necessarily warm to the idea that the Pacific might have its own version of relationships. And so, as is typical, because people sometimes that are parts of, that are institutional minded, sometimes like to deal with their own formula, right? So they would go to their ambassadors and so forth, and deal with but on the other hand, the Pacific culture is built on relationships, and so what the Pacific Island Leaders Conference allowed was for these relationships to build up build up a kind of block.
Mm.
And so, you know, what was interesting with among the Pacific leaders was that when we had meetings like we did in Hawai'i and elsewhere, or even here in Hawaii, it meant that Hawaii had a vote on Pacific policy that they wouldn't have in a forum. And so, why was that important? Well, it was important in two dimensions. That, fortunately for us, we had a delegation, congressional delegation, who were able to explain it to the what I would call the bureaucratic point of view, people with bureaucratic point of view. It was important, first of all, for the Pacific Island leaders because they felt that they had somebody who would understand their point of view, number one. And for us, it was important because it meant that we were part of a kind of larger force. You know, today, I think, fortunately, America recognizes the importance of the Pacific. But there was a time when basically the country's attention went right over us and, you know, focused directly on Asia. And so how could we make a difference unless we were all together? So, you know, there was those two dimensions where it was beneficial to Hawaii, but it was also very beneficial to the Pacific Islands. There's a third element, obviously, which is a cultural one. You know, it was also a chance for Pacific Island people, many of whom were, in a sense, at least culturally related, to share their cultures. And so out of this kind of environment, you have the arts festivals, the many exchanges and the like. And I remember that we even had like sub-organizations within these groups that made up the Pacific Island Leaders Conference. I mean, for example, in the Northern Pacific and with Samoa, we had something called the PBDC, the Pacific Island Development Conference, which was an organization of the American territories and Commonwealth and the state of Hawaii in the Pacific, which would be Guam, Marianas, Samoa, and Hawaii. What did that mean? That meant that we had a block talking about Pacific issues in the National Governors Association, and so we were bringing not only Pacific matters to Congress and the State Department, we were also doing it on internal policies in the United States. And because that association was also part of the Pacific leaders, then when we talked to the American governors, we were talking Pacific-wide policies that affected us. And that got translated in our domestic policies. That we had on the Southern Pacific, the Polynesian Alliance, which was New Zealand and Fiji and the Cook Islands and Tahiti and Hawaii. And so we, again, through Hawaii and through this association, we were taking different kinds of policies, because it wasn't only about things like recognizing Taiwan or mainland China. It was about drug policy, trade agreements, aviation policy. You know, what if independent Samoa was going to, or even American Samoa was going to prosper, they needed transportation lines. They needed, and if Hawaii then needed to deal with them, to deal with the diaspora that was coming to Hawaii. People were coming here, either to school or to find a better life, or it was, in other words, our border was the water. So, the same kind of policies that the rest of America talks about, their border policies, we were facing here. And that had to be known domestically. So we're not only talking about Hawaii playing an international role. Now, we are also fortunate enough to be, not only were we doing this for the United States, the dream, we were doing this for Asia. When Japan wanted to increase its influence across the Pacific, guess where they came? They came here for us, through the East-West Center, through our governments, the local government, to explain their ambitions to the Pacific Islands. In fact, Japan, for example, put millions upon millions of dollars into the development of what we call ocean terminal energy, or OPEC. And that investment was made in the island, in Hawaii, in the state of Hawaii, at the National Energy Lab on the Big Island. But that was not only to impress Hawaii, that was being done here as an opportunity to develop an energy source that could be used in little islands across the Pacific. In fact, the Natural Energy Lab here was in Hawaii, which is one of our achievements, I think, as a state government, was developed as a incubator to transfer technology to the rest of the Pacific, often funded by Taiwan, by Japan, and by Asian countries. And, this is really the opportunities. And Hawaii's major advantage was that we paid attention to the Pacific, and we were part of it. And so we made it known elsewhere, as well as, here, right here. And the biggest trump card, I think, of all of this was that the dream of Hawaii's dream for years, and you could see the speeches, and it resonated in the speeches of our governors and so forth, was that we would become the Geneva of the Pacific. And how do you do that except become a gathering place for the rest of the people? So, yeah, it was when the United States, for example, and New Zealand even. So this is not only about the natives, this is about when New Zealand was having, and the U.S. was, here we have two friends with a heavy stress point, because New Zealand was not allowing nuclear-powered ships to go into their waters. Where else could they meet but here? Where else would it be neutral ground? And a lot of that obviously took place at the military base, but when the civilian side had to meet, actually this place, the East-West Center, was the perfect site for it. So people could have informal discussions. Hawaii, again, using the resources of the East-West Center, actually had what we called an offshore alliance of offshore provinces and states, starting from Jeju Island in Korea, going down to Okinawa, going down, all of these were our sister states, going down all the way through to Hainan Island. And this was the only, and Taiwan. We were the only place where Taiwan, and it was fun because Taiwan actually, and so just to show that that the Pacific is just not, Pacific Islands, but Taiwan actually held a meeting where there was a full-on vote of the National Assembly to see whether or not we could become a sister state with the province of Taiwan, because we already had sister state alliances with Hainan Island and with Guangzhou in China. And they agreed, okay, they could have it. Now, why is this important? Because we used to have conferences with all our sister states, and this was in those days, were one of the very few, if not the only one, of places where both where communist China and Taiwan would be in the same meeting. Now, they would have to go down different elevators and be in different sections of the hotel, but they could sit at the same table when we were discussing Pacific-wide policy. So the vision that these early leaders had, like Ratamara and Burns and Ariyoshi and the presidents of the United States, Johnson, even Nixon, all of those guys, was being fulfilled because there was a convening place.
Thank you, Governor. And now that the Pacific Islands report, can I just really short, why do you think it's important to have this relaunching of the Pacific Islands report, which we'll do in March, and that it's important to hear from the Pacific voices?
Well, for the same reasons that we've been discussing. First of all, they are in our side of the world, and they are important because, if for no other reason, well, first of all, it's important, I think, to have the report because in a real way, it's more than an exchange of information. It's kind of an exchange of trust. So when you let people know how we're working together, where we're working together, what their value is, what our value is to each other, which is what the report really does from a bird's eye view. It may be individual articles, but what it is people sharing things that are important to them. And it is, in my opinion, a tangible symbol of relationship. And I think it's unfortunate that there may have been a time when that wasn't expressed as often as it should have been.
Thank you, Governor, for that. So just some final thoughts on, when I think about, since you knew him,
Yeah.
Yes, Ratu Sirkami Sesemara, great picture. He wrote this Pacific Way and his story, but people reference that a lot now, and it has so many meanings to different people. I wondered if you could share just, some final thoughts on
Ratamara?
on the Pacific Way, how you see, what does that mean to you, and what is your vision for Pacific Islands as we go into the future, as we think about the Pacific
Well,
Way?
I think that, well, first of all, that's a really interesting question, and it probably will, if I really thought about it, I might keep you here for another 5 hours.
Okay.
But I think the Pacific Way, first of all, is an understanding that the oceans are not dividers, that they're actually highways, and that in many respects, understanding that is kind of foundational to understanding what I believe is necessary in today's world, in the sense that we need to know that the planet itself is finite. See, if you don't learn anything else on an island, you learn that things have to be taken care of. That if you don't take care of what you have, it disappears. And sometimes when people, cultures, countries are on a continent, that's not as obvious. But here, when you live on an island, things are finite, and so you learn to depend on nature, you learn to depend on your neighbors. And so water is not the barrier, water is how you travel to your next neighbor, how you communicate, how you do things. And so the Pacific Way is an expression of living in those kinds of circumstances. So as the world becomes smaller and we begin to realize that the world in its sense is becoming an island, then, things like mountains, things like waters, things like all of those things that we naturally thought of as boundaries, maybe not so much so. Because we are all in this together, and and resources are finite. So if there's any lesson, if you had to pick one lesson that an island could teach a continent, is how to live with finiteness, how to have resources and feed your people. I mean, okay, we started with Hawaiian culture, and I'll end with it in the sense that one of the great heroes of Hawaiian antiquity is the chief Umi. Umi was the grandfather or great-grandfather of our great king Kamehameha. And reason why he was important was he was considered the epitome of what a leader should be. And when he was growing up, he was famous because what he would do was he would find people in need in the kingdom or wherever and he would go home and take all the food that they had in the household and feed the people who needed it the most, right? And so when his parents and people went out for dinner, there was nothing for them. And so Umi would get a beating almost every other day, okay? And so the question then, because you tell your children this story, you tell them, and so the question then becomes, if you're going to be a leader, what would Umi do? He would feed the people. So the expression of leadership on an island was, a chief is not a good chief unless he eats after everybody else. So leadership in the islands is built on that principle. You hold your power, you hold your chiefdom, you hold your status because you do what is good for the people and not yourself. That's the Pacific Way.
Very profound, Governor. Do what is good for the people and not yourself. That's the Pacific Way.
Yeah.
Tears. That's like really profound.
Well, that is the Pacific Way.
Yeah. But when you say it with that story is really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you
so much. And I will